Hi, Legare. It's wonderful to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us for the interview technique workshops, which is really all about transitions in your career, answering the questions around gaps in work history or gaps in the resume, and also making changes and pivoting into the administrative field. And Legare is also going to help us with how to answer the good old behavioral interview questions or the situational interview questions. So Legare, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Why don't you go ahead and intro yourself?
Great. Thanks so much, Kiki. And I see some familiar faces in here, whether it's from the Grace Institute from a few years ago or some current Grace women, but thank you so much for having me. As Kiki said, my name is Legare. It does look nothing like it's pronounced if you look in the little corner of my box. I am a recruiter in New York. I've been on the staffing agency side for close to Oops. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. And I think that during the past year, it's probably been one of the hardest times for anyone in New York trying to find a job, to be honest. So what I was hopeful, and for anyone that's attended any of my interview coaching sessions or any of my seminars, please know that the best way in these seminars is if you have a question, immediately put it in the chat box. I am great at pivoting. I'm great at being able to help really personalize specific questions too. How we're going to format today is the first 30 minutes, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through some just interview 101 when it comes to transitions and gaps, and then some of the situational questions. I'll pause after each slide if there are any specific questions that you feel like could be helpful. And then at the end, I'm going to try to leave about 20 minutes for questions, and they can be, I usually don't have to see someone's resume to help answer these questions. So as beneficial, I want this to be as beneficial as possible for each of y'all. And Kiki does have my information. So if there are any follow-up questions, if we're not able to answer them during this time, I'm happy for her to send my contact information out and can answer them individually as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just give me a second. Share it here. Oh, I think that I'm sharing your screen, Kiki, for some reason. Let's see here. Let me try this. Can everyone see this? Just a thumbs up, if so, the Beacon Hill. Okay, great.
No, this is showing a Zoom link page, web page.
Okay. Yep. That's not what I'm looking for. Give me 1 second. Kiki, what I might need to do, because for some reason for me to share the screen, you might have to not be the co-host for a second so then I can go into my actual Citrix, which is where the full, oh, there it is. Hold on 1 second. How about now?
Yes.
Great. Technical difficulties, just our new normal. So this is the two main things, as Kiki mentioned, that we're going to talk about: transitions, gaps in employment, how to walk through your resume when having to explain some of those transitions and gaps. Again, please, anything in the chat box, Kiki can flag to me, or someone else that's a moderator just can let me know and unmute themselves if there is a specific question that I can address. But I usually find that you will forget the question and the specificity if we leave it all the way until the end. So please make sure if you do have it, just start typing and I can definitely help with it. So let's start. I just wanted to give a quick overview about Beacon Hill. I actually see some faces of people that I've worked with or that I've also recently met with that I'm helping in their job search. Beacon Hill is a staffing agency. We're in 63 different cities, and we have an office in New York, which is the one that I help run. And I also help run a specific division that's called Beacon Hill Associates. We have offices all over, as mentioned, but my team places executive assistants, personal assistants, office managers, receptionists, client services, really anything in the support nature we help with. So we also have a really strong temporary division that can help with shorter term placements. So I have spoken to a good amount of Grace women that are either working with me and or with someone on my temp to perm team. So I'm always happy to connect with anyone as well, just to have a good recruiter looking out for you. So I do agree, one of the hardest things to do is walking through your resume, especially if there is a gap, or if you really didn't like a job and you're having to explain positives from that job. I think that interviewers sometimes will ask questions in really unique, different ways, especially right now when navigating this virtual reality. So I think the best way that I can help, instead of saying, walk me through your resume, what we're really going to focus on is when you are walking through your resume and you're about to finish talking about a specific job, how can we do that? What's going to be the best way for us to be able to create some type of strong example to give the interviewer that feels very natural and also feels doesn't feel like you're having to force anything. So there are a few different things. Number one, when you left a job and you didn't like it, what can you pull from that? If you took time off of work for personal reasons, doesn't matter what they are, but if you took time off, how do you explain that? A transition into a different career path. You are looking to move into something different. What is that like? Number four, you unfortunately were let go. That happens to 90% of the workforce, whether you were in a different place in your life, and whether it was time commitment issues, whatever it may be. How do you explain that? So what we're going to do is, in this next slide, I'll kind of go through each individual one of those, and we'll kind of just go through it now. I'm going to flip over to the next slide and then come back to it so I can help with each of these examples. But please put in the chat box if there are any other ones out of these four that you feel like that are a bit difficult to explain, and then I'm going to help with different kind of tactics on how to explain it. So this is the most important thing. When you're transitioning through your resume and you're describing, I used to work at Beacon Hill Staffing Group as a recruiter. I worked on a team of 15 people. My primary responsibilities included, and then I'll go through what I do. And instead of then saying, I left because I didn't like the job, you would say, what did I learn from this job? Even if you didn't like one of your roles in the past, whether it was in retail, what if it was in the service industry? Instead of thinking about, oh, I just really didn't like that job, so I needed to leave, what was the skill set that you learned? Your interpersonal skills, patience, remaining calm under pressure, being organized. All of those are really good adjectives and descriptive adjectives that every employer would be looking for. It's just learning how to be able to say it in an interview. So what I'm going to go back, I'm going to read through this and we'll go back and talk about it for each of these four examples. So let's say that for me, let's pretend like I didn't like my job at Beacon Hill. And I'm going to say, instead of saying I left just because it wasn't something I was excited about, I would say, I think the biggest thing I learned was how to work with all different types of personalities in recruiting, for example. And then I'm going to give a really specific example of maybe a candidate that was really challenging and had a hard time partnering with me. That's the example I would give. And then say, and ultimately, I didn't see this as my long-term career path. So I decided to find a new opportunity. I decided to find a new job. That sounds a lot better than saying, I didn't like this job, or I was ready for something new. I needed growth. You want to find something that still feels personal to you, that you can speak with confidence, but you're able to bring it back into something that you learned. So going back to this particular component, just give me 1 second, a job you didn't like and why you left. This is a really good, that one specific example, instead of describing, I didn't really like the environment, that's okay. But a better way to say it is you always want to think about what's a positive word you can say. I didn't feel like this was the right environment for me long-term. I do well with a more positive working culture. I do better working with a strong manager who has good communication. Those are kind of the things you want to think about. And that's one of the biggest, I think, hurdles that people have to jump through when they're walking through their job to job, and it's a job you didn't like. How can you put it in a positive way that isn't lying, and that it's you, and that you feel confident in being able to say. I'm going to stop right there and see if anyone has any specific questions about this particular one, because this is a bit of a different, this is one of the harder ones of a job you didn't like, but maybe you just took it at that time. Does anyone have any questions, or maybe a way that they've answered it before? Feel free to unmute yourself if you would like. Just always like to pause after that one too.
Yeah, we've got Donna with her hand raised. Go ahead and unmute, Donna.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Donna.
I think I'm the exception to the rule where I absolutely loved every job that I had. I
That's
love
good.
work. I love work. I love school. Is it all right to say that I left one job because it was only part-time and I was looking for a full-time position?
That's perfect. Yeah. And the way I would say that, Donna, is, when I took this role part-time, it's what fit with me in my professional
I did it
career.
while I was a student, but once I graduated, part-time wasn't cutting it.
That's perfect. So once I had finished my coursework, or I had completed my degree, I ultimately looked for a full-time position.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's perfect.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, great.
All right, and then we have Tiffany Cruz. Go ahead and unmute.
Great.
So, hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi. So I used to work at Foot Locker, and I decided to leave Foot Locker because I wanted to continue my education. So I actually did say that in a couple of interviews before. I don't know if that's a good way of saying it.
That's a great way of saying it, Tiffany. I think that, again, as we're thinking through these transitions, and Donna, this applies to you too, always, and right before you're about to say why you left, pick something that you learned. What did you take away? And for you, Tiffany, a good example at Foot Locker, it could be patience, or working with a variety of different types of personalities. Pick something like that, so then it softens that transition. So when you're saying, ultimately, the biggest thing I learned from working at Foot Locker was how to work with so many different types of personalities that walked into the store, for example. And then think of a really good example, and then say, ultimately, I had the opportunity to continue my education, and I would have always looked back and wondered, what if? That's another good little phrase. It's one of my favorite ones. I'll say it one more time. I would have always looked back and wondered, what if I wasn't able to take that opportunity? And it is true, because I think that so many times we're faced with decisions when it comes to our career, where and I'm sure a lot of y'all can agree with this, of thinking you have 3 different options, and each one that you would take, you're always going to look back probably in a year and think, well, what if I had gone down this path? But for you, Tiffany, what's great is you can say, but education was really important to me. So I wanted to make sure if I had this opportunity, I was able to give it my all.
Right. Thank you very much.
Of course. I just have always found when you can add a little bit more of that detail, instead of just saying I left because I had education, I was able to continue coursework or go back to school, add a little bit more about why, that education is important to me. Those are really good kind of ways to think about that.
Thank you. Yeah, we have Jennifer Hahn next.
Great. Oh, Jennifer, I recognize your name. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I was just going to say that when I heard about transitions, when it comes to different career paths, I'm thinking transferable skills as a possible way to explain why I really want to leave this job and find a new job, or maybe continue some education as in continuing education. So I would say transferable skills, perhaps, for example, communication, anything like that, as I know.
Yeah. And I think that that's where, when you're ending, if you're looking to leave a job because you feel like that it's going to tap into a different skill set, and that's something that's really important to you, that's a really good way to think about it too. That's why I always like to say, to talk about what you've learned from each job. And then when you're moving into the next one, it allows you to continue to build upon that skill set more than anything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I have a quick question, Legare.
Sure.
So I'm curious, if maybe this is on a next slide, but are there certain keywords, like phrases, that you think are good to explain those transitions? Like, I heard you say some things like, I ultimately decided to, or I transitioned to, things that help connect the dots between where people have been and where they're going.
Yes, that's a great question. And you just hit on some of my favorite ones. I was looking to transition my skill set. It was time for me to, I decided, you know, to take the opportunity to continue my education. So as you're hearing some of these words, you don't think there's no negative word choicing that's come in. That's the most important thing when you're walking through some of these transitions and you're on interviews. You want to be thinking, is there anything I'm saying that sounds a bit more negative? What are some of the positive word choices we can use to help with this the explanation? I had the opportunity. It was time for me to transition so I could build upon this skill set. I left, and I'm seeing a few things. I will answer these in the chat box. And yes, I can definitely review education level for sure. But I think that Kiki, it's, you know, as to Kiki's point, there isn't just kind of like a toolbox of here are the 5 words to use for each transition. But what I think a great exercise is after today's seminar, really look at your resume and think about, all right, so when I left this job, 2 things, what did I learn? And what's a good transitionary word for me to use? What makes sense based off of my own story? And I think that can be helpful in really then creating a bit more of your pitch and hearing yourself say it, because the more confident you are in your pitch and the more you practice, the better you're going to feel, because it's your own story and you're not putting things in that don't sound like you either. And then I am just going to quickly answer, because this is very pertinent. And please make sure that I'm saying your names correctly. It's Damaris Valdez, who asked, what is the best way to respond when we leave a job for personal reasons? Just that. You don't need to go into any detail. Ultimately, I needed to take some time off for personal reasons. Done. Ultimately, and whether it was PC issues, ultimately I left as the working culture wasn't the right fit for me long term. And you don't need to go into any specific details about that, but you can then add one line in, I work the best with positive people. I work really well with team players, or in an environment where teamwork is appreciated. So in that way, you're not speaking negatively about an environment or maybe a colleague that you didn't get along with, or a manager that wasn't great. You're talking about you left because it wasn't the right cultural fit. And here's what's important to you in an office culture or in a manager, or having clear communication, a more structured schedule. Those are really good ways. So then you're not talking ill of your prior company, but making sure you're able to address that it just wasn't the right fit, or if you needed to take time off, that's okay to say too, for sure. And you don't need to say I needed to take time off to raise my family. No, they don't need to know any of that. I took time off for personal reasons. And then 5 years later, I re-entered the workforce by working at boom. You don't have to over talk or over explain some of those, because ultimately it's not the interviewer's right to ask why. But again, when you speak confidently in it and you don't pause, especially whether you're leaving for personal reasons for another job due to environment or an issue, or you're leaving because you took time off because you needed to, you don't have to explain any of those. You just can then move right through into what that next opportunity on your resume is. I'm going to stop right there and see if anyone has any specific questions about that. Because I know sometimes that can be a trickier one, whether it is you had a colleague that was really rude, or just felt like the manager wasn't the right fit. And that's usually the best way to describe it.
Hi, Legare, it's Donna again. How are you?
Hi, Donna.
Okay, being of a much older demographic, how do you deal with ageism, which totally exists in the workplace?
Yes, it does, unfortunately. So were you talking about in an interview when you're applying for jobs, or can you give me a little bit more clarity surrounding that specific question, how to handle it?
Well, I can remember when I first entered Hunter College.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to give you an example. And I met with the Dean of Academic Advising.
Okay.
For a one-on-one, because I wanted a mentor. This woman, who was maybe 10 years my senior, literally shut me down and told me, like, let's face it, by the time I get my degree, I'm going to be a senior citizen. Like, who would want to hire me? And I thought that was so unprofessional.
Right.
But at least I give her respect, because at least she didn't sugarcoat it.
Right.
But like, how do you deal with that? Because without like ruining your financial future, because, you know, let's face it, like sometimes harsh words are spoken and your reaction You know, it's kinetics, you know, every reaction, you know, so what's the best way to deal with that?
Yeah, and I think that that's a little bit more difficult to answer without it being, you know, if someone's asking you your age or your graduation year. So I think that the better way for me to help with that is if they ask that in an interview, your age or graduation year, you don't have to give them any of those details. You just can say, you know, I attended college or I graduated with my associate's degree. And if they're saying what year, you can say, you know, I was able to attend, you know, in the middle of my career or at the beginning of my career. You don't have to ever describe a specific date. So that's usually a good way to deflect and answer that question. And people are going to unfortunately say different things, and ageism is a real thing, unfortunately, in the New York market, well, in a lot of different markets right now. But the best way you can handle it is that more so understanding how to answer questions if they're being directed at you without feeling like they could use your answer against you, depending on kind of the question, the reason why they're asking that question.
All right, thank you.
And that actually is helpful when we're talking about, and then is it, I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, Alina? Is that correct?
It's so you can just call me Alina, but alumnae.
Okay, hi Alina. Yeah, so education level, and please let me know if this doesn't answer your specific one, since we just spoke a little bit about Hunter College with Donna and education. If again, it comes back to just confidence in saying it. I think I hear from a lot of candidates, and I really coach them on not immediately coming out saying, I don't have my bachelor's degree, I don't have my associate's degree. And it's thinking about, what do I not have? You don't want to focus on that. What do you have? You went to the Grace Institute. Start with that if that's your education. I recently was able to complete, or 2 years ago, I completed a program at the Grace Institute. I was selected out of a larger group of individuals, and I was in a class of 50 women where we were able to do this. Here's what I learned. If you did complete some coursework, ultimately I went a year at Brookdale Community College. Working full-time became more of a priority for me, so I wasn't able to continue my education. If it is something that you feel like that you are planning on going back and taking more credit, say that. If I had the opportunity in the future to be able to return for nights and weekends, that's something that is important to me. But right now, finding a full-time position is more of a focal point. Done.
Okay. So specifically with my circumstance, I honestly, I have 5 classes left, but there was a really big bill. And this is kind of how I express it. I kind of stumble because I'm just coming over kind of being ashamed about not being able to complete it when I wanted to, and just personal reasons. But I don't have that much left, and there's a very big bill that I don't necessarily see myself being able to afford that right now in the near future.
And that's okay, Alina. And I think for you, I can tell, you know, when education is such a personal thing, and finances are that much more, make it that much more personal too. And so for you, oh, go ahead.
I think I would just want to stress that the roles I'm looking for almost each time demand or require, it's not negotiable that I have a degree. And I'm really trying to see how I can achieve overselling myself with that potential and the intent to work towards it.
Yeah. So I will tell you that some of my clients that used to require a degree are not always requiring a degree anymore. So I do think that in the next 6 months to a year, there are always going to be, unfortunately, clients that think that that's a requirement, when I believe that experience and life experience is so much more important than, do you have your bachelor's degree? Now, that's my personal opinion, and I try to push that on every single client when they call me and tell me they need a degree. My first question, sometimes aggressively, is why? And a lot of them have been much more open in saying, if you have someone that's the right fit for me, send them to me. But I think for you, Alina, the best way to do it is really spend some time thinking about, you only have 5 courses, 5 credits or 5 courses left. That's fine. And all you need to say is, ultimately, completing my degree is an important thing for me long-term. Ultimately, I wasn't able to do that due to financial constraints. I only have 5 courses left. When I have the opportunity, I will return, but finding a full-time position is more important for me at the moment. Done. Write that out type it out, practice in the mirror, hear yourself say it, because when you believe it, that's when the company is going to, and it's not overselling yourself in other areas. It's you feeling confident in those 3 sentences. And that's the most important thing, for sure. Any other questions just before I move on to the next slide? I know that covered a lot in the last little bit. And I want to, yeah.
We do agree. And I also just want to echo, I can't wait, Ajane or Alina, whichever one you prefer, for you to be rehearsing that in our Beacon Hill Fridays. I'm a big fan of mantras and Post-it notes that sit in front of me behind my computer while I'm looking at all of you. So let's go next to Mildred Martinez.
Yes, Mildred.
Hi, and thank you. I am kind of back-ending on both Donna and Alina's concerns about education.
Okay.
For me, I am the older worker, but I'm a high school graduate. I don't have, because I'm of an older generation, I just went straight to work.
Yep.
It wasn't, so my concern is I do feel a little uncomfortable because my year of graduation is listed on my resume. And if that comes up as a question in an interview, did you go to college? And I'm going to be like, no.
Right.
So,
right.
And I heard what you said about life experience, because I'm a believer that sometimes life experience speaks more than a degree, depending on everyone's situation.
And I think that for you too, Mildred, it's similar to Alina. When you graduated from high school, it was more important for you to get life experience, which was work experience. And so I think it's, again, how are you phrasing it? So instead of allowing them to wait to ask, do you have your degree? The minute that they say, well, Mildred, walk me through your resume. You start with, well, after I attended high school, I had the opportunity to enter the workforce. I get a positive. I immediately had the opportunity to join the workforce as an XYZ employee. And then that way you're not having to address it. And if they do ask you if it's in a different interview style, and they say, well, Mildred, do you have your degree? Unfortunately, I don't have my bachelor's degree, but what I do have is the years of experience. And for me, after I graduated from high school, I felt like that was the best path for me to really start getting into the workforce.
Okay.
Again, I'm sure you can even hear, and I'm sure a lot of y'all can understand, I speak with also a lot of passion in my voice. It's hard for me not to. I love talking about interviewing because I do think that it is one of the hardest things to do. But I think that when you can change the inflection and sometimes change the mental mindset of what do I not have to how can I answer this in a positive light? And it's all about how you're saying it. That is how you can completely change your interview game, because you're believing it. And it is true. And I think that the other, to add on to that, when you believe it, the right company's going to believe it too. You don't want to work for a company that's going to say, oh, well, we only, going back to Alina and Donna and then Mildred, your point, like, well, we only want someone that has 10 years of experience. Well, that company has just violated 18 different, labor laws, to be honest with you, just by even saying that one sentence. So you have to remember, you want to work for the right company, and the right company is going to understand who you are when you're able to speak with confidence and speak from who you are as a person. And that comes from sometimes the practice and being our best advocates and our own worst critics, and the practicing to say, I need to sound more positive in this, or I need to make sure I'm smiling. Those little things can completely change how you're able to feel in some of these interviews and answering some of these really tricky questions, for sure.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Yes, Gloria, I think I see you waving.
Yes, you do. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
All right. Oh my God, I think I forgot the question.
Well,
Oh
I
my
think
God.
I saw you write it in here. Do you keep the year you received your diploma? Because that shows how many years of experience. Now, we're not going to talk about how old, or I heard someone say that I'm on the older generation. You have more experience. Let's start changing that terminology. Okay. I am an experienced professional. That is a good way to describe it. I have a lot of clients that say, Legare, I want a mature, experienced professional. Great. Perfect. Sounds good to me, because I like to work with mature individuals too. So I think number one, start thinking about it from that standpoint. Number two, you do not need to keep your year. That is completely up to you. You don't have to have it on there. Sometimes I think when you are going and talking about your jobs from a transition standpoint, you want to keep those years on there. That's more important than when you received your diploma, for sure.
One more question.
Yes.
It came to me.
Yeah.
How do you tell an employer when they ask at the interview, why do you want to leave the job that you're at now?
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, all of the questions like that, they come right in. And I feel like, something that Kiki and I've talked about a lot, you can prepare as much as you want for interviews, and then you get asked that question, even if it's a question you've prepared for and you're like, I wrote this down 3 times yesterday and all of the words have escaped me. So just remember, just to help with this, because this is a really good tidbit, if you need 3 seconds on an interview, say, you know what? I haven't been asked that before. Can you give me a few seconds to think of a good example or a good response? Give yourself a few seconds. And again, when you say that with confidence, it does give you a few seconds, to be honest. But Gloria, just the non-interview answer, what is the reason why you're looking to leave your current role?
Well, right now my current role is temping, and even though I'm steady, I need a full-time job.
That's perfect. Okay. So the best way to answer that is, I've loved having the opportunity to be in a temporary position, but I'm looking for something that provides more stability and a full-time role with benefits.
Okay, great.
Done. And you don't need to overdo it. We don't have to over talk about it after that. I would hear that and say, makes sense. I think any interview would hear that and say, I would want something more stable that's going to have more of an opportunity for benefits too. That's perfect. So I think that that's a good way to explain that, for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome, Gloria.
I see a few other hands raised, but Legare, do you want to move forward, or do you want to?
Let's maybe have 2 more questions, then I can go into some of the situational questions. And then Kiki, if we don't get into all of the situational questions, we can maybe schedule another situational, just because I do feel like the transitions and a lot of these questions are very pertinent. Yes. And then if we needed to schedule a different Zoom for the situational questions, we can do that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is really something that, on nearly everybody at Grace Institute is working with.
Right.
It's some transition of some part of some kind. We've all done it in our careers. So this is really, really great. I'm going to go to Shalu and then Elizabeth. So let's start with Shalu.
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Shalu. I saw you a week and a half ago. Good to see you.
Same here. I just want to know, what did I say? Because I did my bachelor in India, and as soon as I came here, I started my career as a cashier. And after 6 years, I leave the job, and I did my pharmacy technician, and now the Grace. I don't have like any too much education from here.
That's okay. I think that you have your degree from India. So that's what you say. Ultimately, I received my degree from XYZ. You don't have to say the year. And then I moved to to New York, to New Jersey, to the States. And I was able to find a position as a cashier at, I think it was Shop and Right or something like that.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Yes.
And then talk about what you did. What did you learn? Again, focusing on those. So then the transitions to becoming a pharmacy technician, it makes sense because that was another opportunity for you. But you have your education. It doesn't matter if it's not US. You don't have to then address that again. You just will then want to talk through your transitions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. And then we're going over to Elizabeth.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to try and ask this it's going to sound more negative than I ever would.
It's fine. This is a safe place. This is not an interview. This is a safe place.
My question is, in a nutshell, how do I explain sort of, I graduated from college and then I immediately opened a bar. So I have a great like foundation, but then I took steps back, and for the past 10 years, I've just been bartending in hospitality. Yeah. How does, like, to me, that just doesn't, I just don't know how to make that narrative look good. Yeah. It's like, you know, started strong, petered out. It's like Benjamin buttoning your career, you know?
Yeah. Well, number one, I think that working within any hospitality space, you learn more than sometimes working in a corporate environment at any point in your career. So change that narrative in your head that it was a Benjamin Button backwards, because I think that that's what I think everyone is saying is the traditional path is working and having a career in corporate America. I would love, you know, my dad's had the same career for 50 years as a realtor in Charleston, South Carolina. That is not me. I've worked at four jobs in 10 years, you know, in different careers. So the traditional path that so many people feel like we have to have, so many companies are realizing that that's not a real thing anymore. So just know that mentally too. Okay. But I think what you can say is, when I graduated for XYZ amount of years, this is the career that I had. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately say, I then needed more flexibility, or for whatever the reason was, Elizabeth, that you needed to break from kind of the traditional Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but you still loved working with people. Or that you still loved being around people and working in a good environment. So you decided to work within the hospitality arena and, you know, doing serving, bartending, kind of whatever was needed in the different kind of environments that you worked in. The biggest thing I learned, how to work with people again, you know, like just think about it like that.
All right. Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
And then we're going to go to Donna. Questions are rolling in.
All righty.
How are you again? Is it good when, like, sometimes you don't have enough experience? Like, this is my comeback line. Although I don't have formal training, I have extensive life experience in such and such. Is that acceptable or no?
Yeah, so it just depends. And because I see that Chelsea Feebles also put in here to piggyback, how do you respond to an interview when they say you're overqualified? The worst feedback to get whenever you're underqualified or overqualified. You're like, do you want me to get experience to become qualified? Or how do I lessen my experience to become qualified in your mind? So I think that I can answer both of these in that way. There's not really a comeback that's going to make people change their minds. So I think that that's the first thing you have to remember. It's all about how you react to what that question is. So for Donna, for you, if they're saying, you know, well, we need someone that has Salesforce, instead of saying it's my life experience that I've had, or I don't have that specific skill set, you can own it and say, I haven't had the opportunity to work within that program yet. However, in my last role, working within Excel or working within a different XYZ database was new to me, and here's how I was able to learn it. So that's usually a good way. And whether it's, you know, we need someone that has a year of receptionist experience. If I was pretending to be Elizabeth, I'd say, I understand that you need a year of receptionist experience. However, for the past 10 years, I have worked in hospitality where I've had to interact with so many different types of personalities, always with a smile on my face. So I do feel like my skill set is transferable. It's not saying, but I don't have all of this. It's saying, what do I have with a specific example, instead of just saying, well, when I worked within hospitality, it's transferable. How? Why? That's the way to really think about it. And then Chelsea, for you, when you're saying, how do you respond to an interview when they say you're overqualified? That's, I think, when you're having to really just take a deep breath, and it's about reacting, whether it's and if you can maybe unmute yourself, was this someone that said it in an interview, or was this someone that said it, you got an email that says you're overqualified?
No, this was an actual office position interview where they looked at my qualifications and they looked at my personal experiences from his employment, and they were saying basically, he goes, you have a great resume, everything looks amazing. You have a great personality, great character, but you're overqualified.
Yeah. So just for y'all to know, when an employer says that, what they're worried about, you're going to leave that job the minute that there's a better opportunity. And that's an employer unfortunately pretending like they're you and not understanding why you would be excited about this job. This is something that no one's ever going to be able to combat because we can't get into a client's mind. But the best way to handle that is you just smile and you say, I understand that my qualifications might look, I'm trying to think of the best way, my qualifications might exceed some of the duties that are required in this role. However, my motivators in making a commitment long-term to a company, because that's all companies are looking for. Are we going to hire someone and trade them for them to leave in 3 to 6 months for a better opportunity? I want loyalty and commitment. So when you can say, however, my priorities in my search are to commit to a company long-term and finding the right company or the right culture or the right environment to do that in, that's the most important to me. And when hearing about this job, here are the 2 things that stood out to me that made me feel like I could be a good fit. And make it along those lines. You want it to be yours. This is just a really good way. So you're not coming back and saying like, well, I want the job. You're saying, I understand that maybe my years of experience or what I've done make me overqualified for what you're looking for. But what's important to me and my search and what I'm looking for long-term is this. So then that way they understand what your motivators are, because sometimes companies don't ask that, but that's an opportunity for you to talk about what they are that matches the job you're interviewing for. Is that helpful? Because again, there's never a right way to answer it, but that way when you speak really calm and confident in that, because that's the worst thing to hear. You're overqualified and you're underqualified. How do you get experience? And then how do you lessen your experience? Because it's nothing you can do, but it's all about, and I've heard this a few times throughout the seminar, reaction. How do you react to what's being said to you? How can you react to make it seem like it's a bit more transferable from your background? And I think that that's usually a really good way to handle that one, overqualified or underqualified. Okay.
Thank you, Legare.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to reflect that I keep hearing something come up. You keep, it's funny. It's like when we interview, all of our insecurities come up, right? And so we start counting, we start making a list of everything we don't have. And it's really interesting that in an interview, when you're job interviewing, it's like you kind of have to, it's bringing up all of these emotions of where we maybe feel deficient. And then what we're supposed to say and project and appear like in the interview is somebody who's very confident and sees all of the good in themselves.
Yes.
So I just want to acknowledge that there's like a real inner conflict that can sometimes happen around interviewing with what we're feeling and what we're needing to say. But it's a real opportunity, as Legare has outlined for us. It's kind of like we have to play mind tricks on us. We kind of have to become our own coach and use the opportunity to actually, again, like really dig into everything that we do have and see ourselves in a really positive light. So I keep hearing this come up, that it always comes back to what do you have? What did you learn? And it kind of applies to what's on your slide here.
Yeah. And I think, Kiki, that's a really good point, because I think that interviewing right now, you get off a phone screen and the first thing we think about is, what did I do wrong? That's every person, even for people who love interviewing, you get off and you immediately critique yourself. It is the nature of this world right now. You immediately start thinking about, what could I have done differently? I think that a really positive thing to do, as y'all and as everyone on this Zoom is looking for a job, allow yourself some grace, for lack of a better word, and really think about giving yourself, after a phone screen or even talking to a friend that might be able to put you in touch with someone in that call or Zoom, and think about, what was I proud of myself for that conversation? Write it down. And then those little things, as you're continuing to have these conversations, are going to be really helpful from a mental standpoint, as it can be, we can have this fatigue of looking for jobs, and those little nuggets are going to help you as you're continuing to look for jobs kind of during this pandemic, for sure.
Absolutely. So I think we should just stick to transitions, because we've got 2 more hands raised and a question that just popped into the chat, but let's go over to Lynette.
Okay.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. So, I recently graduated from, well, not recently, but I graduated from Grace in 2019. I wanted to know because the last job I had, I didn't like the job. It didn't work out with the management, so I left. When you had suggested, when they asked you why did you leave, you say that, I didn't feel that the work environment was right for me.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's okay to say. If you didn't like your job, it's being able to say, here's what I learned instead of here's what I liked. Those are two very different things. Whenever you have a job that you don't like, you don't have to say, well, I really liked this, because they're going to tell that you might not be telling the ultimate truth if you didn't love your job. So instead of saying, here's what I liked, saying, here's what I learned. And if it was because of the culture or a difficult personality, you can say, I think the biggest thing I learned was how to work with a management personality that was different than mine. We had different communication styles.
Okay.
Here's how I was able to work. Here how I was able to make it work during my time there.
Okay.
That's how you can really shift, like when you haven't loved a job, to really kind of flip it into a narrative that's not all rainbows and butterflies, but it's still something that's going to be important for the interviewer to hear, for sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
I'm taking notes, so I just want to make sure.
It sounds like Kiki will we'll make sure the recording is there for everybody, so then everyone can listen back to it as needed too.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. That was a great question. And I love that piece on what you learned and what you liked are two different things.
Yeah.
And that reflecting and speaking about what you learned is really the part that's the professional conversation.
Yes.
Okay, we have one other hand raised, Laura.
Hi, Legare, this is for you. Have you ever heard, I've never seen anyone like you?
That someone in an interview said, we've never seen someone like you?
Yes, I had interviewed it was for construction. It was a small construction company. I went in there and you dress your suit, you do the professionalism. And during the interview, he's like, I've never seen anyone like you. But I just kept talking about whatever he was talking about, asking questions, and with a smile. That's me. I didn't get the job, but I'm like, I've never heard that before.
Well, I think it's also interesting because I hear that and I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, I've never seen someone like me. In what way? It leaves it somewhat open-ended. So I think that without knowing the context or that client, it's hard for me to answer that. But the best way to handle something like that is, again, how you react. Oh, well, I'm happy that you are enjoying hearing about my experiences. And then you kind of just move right on with a smile, because there's no good way to kind of come out and say, you don't want to say, well, what do you mean? Ultimately, that is what's going to be going on in your head. But it's just best to kind of not react to it. Say, I'm happy to continue to walk you through my experiences and kind of move on to the next thing.
That's, I guess, it being overqualified line. That's probably where that was going. But, I like the flow. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And Elizabeth is back with more.
All right. One more quick question. Do you think that it's better to have gaps on your resume or to have like lots of sort of similar jobs? Because I moved back and forth from Texas. Also, there's just variables of why I'd leave one. Most of them, I didn't get fired. I just would leave. More money, different location. But it does make me seem sort of flighty, I feel like.
In hospitality? Do you mean like when you were bartending?
Yeah.
So probably I'd put like various restaurants as your title, and then just put server / bartender, and then put maybe like whenever the years, I'm making these up, 2005 to 2015 underneath. Then you can put the locations after it too. And you can, since it sounds like you worked in a variety of different ones, you just want to make sure you know where your months and dates are for those from a background check. So, you were employed for a year and a half here, 6 months here, but you don't have to over talk about it. You can just say I worked within the hospitality space for 10 years.
There's nothing under 6 months, under a year even, but it's just, you think that that's like on a resume that's acceptable to not have the like individual things?
Yeah, you can, what sometimes you can do is you can put various restaurants dash text, put the city in Texas you were in / New York, put dates underneath. You can put maybe 5 or 6 of the names. that are maybe a bit more recognizable, or the ones that maybe you worked at for longer, that where you'll have references from. So then that way that it's showing some of those places. And I think that should be fine.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we've got Donna back for more.
I'm good.
Hi, this is a different Donna.
Oh, hi, Donna.
Hi, so maybe I'm overthinking it, but my question is, how do you put together, you learn to work with different personality as a reason you're leaving the job and left the job?
And then you're applying for a job that needs someone that can work with difficult personalities.
So
Right.
if you are able to learn to work with different personality, and that's the reason behind why you're leaving, how does that go together?
So that's always where you have to add a specific example in. You can't just leave it as that. If someone's saying ultimately, you know, the question earlier was, I left maybe because it just wasn't the right fit. If it's because it was manager's personality or working style, you want to give a bit more detail, but what you learned was how to better work with a different personality than yours. For example, I'm a list person. My manager was a bit more sporadic. Here's how I was able to try to work within it for the first 6 months. You're giving actionable items to then describe how you were able to try to make it work, until at some point you just realize it wasn't going to be the right long-term fit, but you're taking.
I guess the key is the long-term fit.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Long-term fit. And then also those examples. If you are a specific type of way, but can be flexible, but then realize it's not productive, that's usually a good way to kind of describe it. But it's all based and rooted on individual experiences and giving those specific examples too.
And using like the manager is not kind of saying something bad about the manager?
It's all about how you say it, you know, like if I pretended like and I did leave my last job because my manager was crazy, but how I would say that in an interview would be, so when I was looking, the reason why I'm currently looking to leave is I'm looking for a better cultural fit with strong management. I think the biggest thing I learned from working at XYZ company for the past year was how to work with someone who was structured their day much differently than I did. For example, he would come in and we would have a meeting set, and within 5 seconds before the meeting was starting, he would cancel it and push it back 3 hours later. Here's how I tried to counteract that. But after a year, I just realized our working styles wouldn't be a good long-term partnership.
Okay.
But this will help me in working with a different personality moving forward. I'm just looking for a stronger match.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's all about how you say it. Like, it's still an actionable item, but not speaking negatively of my boss who was crazy.
So we're never speaking. I think the other thing I'm picking up is really it's about not being negative.
Yes.
Yeah. Which again can be really difficult when maybe we've had a bad experience or we're feeling really shaky about a particular, part of our past.
Yes.
So it is these little bits of mind tricks, but ultimately, this is the game, right? And hopefully the experience as well for everybody here, not just at Grace Institute, but like the process of interviewing itself is a great opportunity for you to actually reframe your own beliefs about yourself, to actually see yourself in a different light, in a more positive light, for you to actually start believing all of those things that you do have, because that's how we see you. That's how the interviewers are looking, at you. So hopefully the process itself will change you as a person to see that what happens when you focus on everything you do have. All right, we have 3 minutes left. I see a few hands raised. I'm going to bump over to Yulia because we missed your question in the chat. And then after that, I'm going to go to Janice.
Okay. And I see Yulia's question about a position on the resume that deludes your profile, but prevents a gap, or leave that position on the resume. For example, a retail role that doesn't tie with the rest, but it may lessen a gap. So it just really depends on how and what you're applying for. If you think a retail role, I've always believed retail and hospitality, you don't have to put 5 bullet points underneath that. You can include, I used to work at Hollister. I would put retail consultant, from XYZ to XYZ. I'd put one bullet point underneath it. And I would just say, I held this job before I was moving to New York. What I learned from this role was. So I think that's a good way to think about it. If you don't feel like it's going to be beneficial for what you're applying for, you don't have to include it on a resume, but you can talk about it in an interview. That's never going to make or break someone probably calling you. It's more of a talking point and just making sure you address it if there is any kind of gap. You can say I worked with, in a few retail environments while looking for something that was back in a professional office environment. I think that that's probably the best way to handle that.
Okay, thank you so much. And then Janice.
Yes.
Hi, I worked as a receptionist for a nonprofit that I truly loved, but unfortunately, they did not have the budget to keep me. So, with saying that, does that reflect negatively on me? Like somebody feeling like, well, maybe they didn't try hard enough to keep you, or something like that?
No, not at all, Janice. Let me tell you something. The budget right now, and for so many, is a very real thing. Companies are having to take, and even if that was 5 years ago, people have to kind of understand, can they take you on both from a medical expense if they were going to offer you medical benefits on top of a full-time salary? So what I would encourage you to say is, I had the wonderful opportunity to take this temporary or temp to perm position. Here's what I learned. Unfortunately, there wasn't an opportunity to go permanent. But a really good way to add in one more line after that, if you're still in touch with someone from there and they would serve as a positive reference, that's when you say, but I actually have wonderful references from a wonderful reference from a manager that I worked with over there. So then that way, it, number one, kind of helps corroborate your story. Number two, it is true. And number three, you're able to really explain the why behind it, backed with someone who's going to help back that up too.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, Legare.
Yeah.
That wraps up, I guess, session one of a couple on career transitions and how to speak about career transitions and gaps in work history, how normal this is, how everybody's career is winding, and we all have personal things that happen. And it's just really about getting comfortable with the language that you can use to speak to that. Before we sign off, Legare, is there any final words that you would like to share?
I think just number one, thank you, because I think that also talking about this is a very vulnerable thing. And I just appreciate the questions and y'all being really open and asking them. I do, I'll make sure that Kiki has all my information, and we'll plan a different seminar to kind of go about the other dreaded question of, tell me about a time, or how would you handle this? Because I think that those can sometimes be the harder ones that are the hardest to prepare for. But I do think that the most important thing is just really remembering that it's just about, the most important thing in interviewing is how you say it. It's your resume. We can't change anything on it. So what can we do? And it's just how you talk. And I think when you can smile, as Kiki said earlier, those Post-it notes and mantras, as I'm sure y'all can tell, I am a fast talker. I've tried to slow down my entire life, and that has not happened at all. So behind my screen right now, if y'all could see it, there are two huge Post-it notes that say smile and speak slowly. Now, speak slowly has not worked, but smiling definitely has. So those little things, I think, just remembering are what are little things that I can do on my own, and that can help me feel really confident in interviewing, because it really is about how you're pitching certain things. So I do think that those are really important, and something that I've done all 10 years whenever I've done seminars like this too.
Absolutely. And I can attest to Legare, you have slowed down. I can tell you've actually gotten better at that. And there's no shame in the Post-its. I know that when I've been on interviews, I've had like a wall of all my examples and my work history and what the skills were that I learned in each one. And you better believe that it was like, I knew that was there. So I had my little aids, during interviews. So do what you got to do. Ladies, we're so grateful that you have been here. We look forward to sharing with you the next date where we'll get into the behavioral questions. Legare, you are an incredible partner. We are so appreciative of you and everything you do for Grace Institute.
Thank you for having me. And thank you. And it was great to see some of the women that I'll see every Friday and some of the women that I've seen over the past year and a half too. So
amazing. Well, we look forward to growing together. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Have a great week.
Bye, everybody.